Today I'm going to complete my presentation on Narayana Iyer. Last month I promised that this fourth and final installment will be fairly brief, and that I would follow it with a separate talk on a householder devotee from North India, Surendra Kaur. However, as usual, I ended up going on multiple tangents and detours that expanded this final Narayana Iyer talk to the same length as the other installments. There won't be time to start a new topic today. So let's start straight away on today's story. The woman on the right of the screen is Ella Mayart, a Swiss woman who visited Bhagavan in the early 1940s. Ella wrote a book about traveling in Asia with her cat, who was called Tipus or Typus, I think that's how it's pronounced. The account included her meetings with Bhagavan at Ramanashram. The two of them, Ella and Tipus, are shown together at the bottom. The top photo is of Ella sprawled out on a chair on Major Chadwick's veranda in 1941. I'm starting this month's presentation with her because she recorded the following very interesting exchange that Bhagavan had with Narayana Iyer. It said, "On another day in the hall, the sub-registrar Narayana Iyer asked why he was so lucky to be at Bhagavan's feet, having done nothing of all the religious practice recommended by the books. Bhagavan said, 'Your past is so rich of lives that in some of them you did what was necessary to bring you here.'" This comment doesn't come from the account of her travels with her cat. It comes from an unpublished journal that came to light about 10 years ago. It was written in French and translated by two French-speaking devotees at Ramanashram. Before I continue, I want to mention in passing that though she was a good photographer herself, she doesn't appear in any photos with Bhagavan. She did, though, take a couple of good pictures of him when he was walking in Palakottu in the late 30s or early 40s. These are the ones on the screen, and the handwriting on the top one is hers. The devotee featured in both of them is Guy Haig, an American engineer who had a hut in Palakottu. When I first saw these photos together, it struck me how happy Bhagavan was. He appears to be laughing and thoroughly enjoying their company in Palakottu. Annamalai Swami told me a nice story about Guy Haig and his time in Palakottu. Mr. Haig once complained to Bhagavan about the noise in Palakottu and how it was stopping him from meditating. Those were the days when hardly anyone lived there, so he must have been very sensitive. In response, Bhagavan taught him how to make earplugs out of beeswax. They were so good, on one occasion, people nearby thought he might have had an accident because he couldn't hear the repeated knocking on his door. This was the 1930s, when the background noise was most likely birdsong and occasional visitors to the nearby Tirtan. I don't think he would enjoy being there in the 2020s, when the primary incoming noise will be truck and bus horns blaring from the nearby Bangalore road. Meanwhile, back to the first slide. The comment on the screen, which I read out a few minutes ago, summarizes Narayana Iyer's attitude towards his relationship with Bhagavan. He was in a state of constant and inexplicable wonder that Bhagavan had picked him out, brought him to Ramanashram, and showered a remarkable degree of love and affection on him. Narayana Iyer never felt that he was a mature devotee who deserved this treatment. Some of the stories I narrated in earlier episodes of the series demonstrate how Bhagavan frequently picked him out for exceptional expressions of his love. The story of him taking Narayana Iyer to the dining room and personally cooking a snack for him is the one that stands out for me. There were a few other devotees who were treated in this way. G.V. Subramaya was apparently one. Here he is in two photos on the right. The one on the left was taken during his years with Bhagavan. The full-body one probably dates from the 1960s. He passed away in 1970. I think it was Devaraja Mudalya who commented in one of his books that Subramaya seemed to get an exceptional amount of love and concern shown to him by Bhagavan, more than most other devotees, according to Mudalya. Why was this so? Perhaps a clue can be found in Bhagavan's comment that appeared on the first slide. Quote, your past is so rich of lives that in some of them you did what was necessary to bring you here, unquote. Devotees who visibly and obviously had some kind of loving and affectionate bond with Bhagavan may have earned their enviable position by having a past life connection with Bhagavan, and not really through the devotion or maturity they displayed in their current lives. I don't know if Bhagavan remembered those past connections or whether he behaved the way he did because the past association compelled his actions in a way that even he didn't understand. Bhagavan was very tight-lipped about having knowledge of devotees' previous lives or connections with him. The one occasion I know when he let his guard down was when Annamalai Swami said that he didn't know enough about building or construction work to do a job that Bhagavan had allocated to him. In an almost throwaway remark, Bhagavan said, "You were an engineer in your past life, you'll soon pick it up." That's Annamalai Swami standing behind Bhagavan in the photo on the right. In the other photo, taken during the construction of the dining room in the late 1930s, Annamalai Swami is standing on a wall with a towel wrapped around his head. When I gave the live version of this presentation to the Ramana Maharshi Foundation, London, I offered the following half-remembered quotation by Bhagavan on this theme, and I said something to the effect, "No one gets to sit on the floor here randomly or by accident. Everyone who reaches here has earned the right to be here through something they've done in the past." I couldn't remember where I'd read it. However, one of the viewers, a Buddhist monk currently living in Australia, asked ChatGPT about the source, and it turned out I had misremembered it slightly or conflated it with similar comments. Two similar comments by Bhagavan were suggested by ChatGPT, the ones that appear on the screen. The first one says, "If one comes here, it is not by one's own effort." That's from Letters. And the second one says, "No one comes to Bhagavan by chance. If one is here, it is because it is written that he should be here." I like this idea, even though my original summary of it was slightly misremembered. We have all earned our right to be in Bhagavan's presence through our endeavors in the past. We may not know what they were, but they gave us the right to associate with the jnani in this life and receive his grace and blessings. If we feel unworthy, it is simply because we have no recollection of the things we did that brought us to our present situation. Instead of feeling miserable about the state of our minds or unworthy to receive Bhagavan's grace, we should recognize that Bhagavan has somehow selected us and brought us under his wing. To reinforce this message, here are two statements by Bhagavan recorded by Muruganal. They appear in the Promises and Declarations section of Padamalai. They are, "Those who have come to my feet with love and without delaying are those whose birth has been graced by God. Theirs is an eminent and true life. Like the children of an emperor, my devotees are heirs to abundant rejoicing." I would concur with this. We are all the favored royal princes and princesses in Bhagavan's spiritual court. Since our spiritual pasts have bestowed this position on us, we have no reason to feel unworthy or that we are not good and deserving devotees. Having said that, I want to go back to Narayana Iyer and his feelings of unworthiness. Viswanatham has reported that this was a regular complaint whenever he met with him. Here is how one such conversation went, recorded by Ganeshan. On many occasions, Narayana Iyer would come to the ashram office, drag me outside, and lead me to the cowshed or to the foot of the hill. He would then share his experiences with me. His refrain always was, "I did not deserve such pointed tenderness from Bhagavan. Perhaps I did some good deeds in my past lives. In this life, I have neither done puja nor sadhana to deserve such special attention and love from him." Ganeshan is standing with Bhagavan on the left of this group photo, which was taken in the early 1940s on the lower slopes of Arunachala. Narayana Iyer must have remembered and been aware of Bhagavan's statement mentioned at the start of today's talk that his activity in past lives had brought him to Bhagavan, but he could never dispel his conviction that he was a totally unworthy recipient of Bhagavan's love and affection. Perhaps he was just observing that Bhagavan did seem to single him out for an unusual amount of affectionate treatment, and was simply wondering, why me and why not any of these other devotees who sit here? It's now time to get back to the narrative of Narayana Iyer himself. For the next few slides, he will be telling his own stories again. This is how he continued with his account. A colleague, Sri T. Viswanatham, was posted as sub-registrar of Tiruvannamalai. Although he was doing the same job that I was, I had never met him. He wrote to me about his good fortune of spending the closing period of about 6 months of his official career at this holy place, and of the much yearned for opportunity to have the darshan of Sri Bhagavan. He intimated to me that he would take up duty in about a week. In the photo on the right, Narayana Iyer is standing behind Bhagavan with his arms folded. I showed the letter to Bhagavan, and the subject then went out of my thoughts. About a week or so afterwards, at about 7:30 p.m., a person who looked orthodox was prostrating before Sri Bhagavan. Evidently, he had read the notice board put up by the ashram management forbidding the devotees from touching Bhagavan's feet. The implication of this is that visitors were not allowed to put their hands on Bhagavan's feet in the traditional gesture of respect and reverence. Viswanatham found an interesting loophole to get around this restriction, or at least one that he felt was not directly contravening the rules on the notice board. Narayana Iyer continues, this person, obviously wishing to avoid being objected to, but unwilling to forego his heart's desire, observed the letter of the rules by clasping his hands behind him, away from Sri Bhagavan, while he prostrated like a gymnast and rubbed his head over the feet of Sri Bhagavan, as a calf would do when fondled. Sri Bhagavan allowed full scope for this indulgence. Viswanatham had not introduced himself prior to doing this, but Bhagavan seemed to know who he was. Narayana Iyer continues, then he, Bhagavan, turned towards me and said, Sri T. Viswanatham. Who had told him so? The newcomer hadn't spoken a word. Perhaps Sri Bhagavan had a sixth sense to scent a devotee. Narayana Iyer now switches to a different topic. He continued, the reactions of Bhagavan to physical pain were always a mystery to me. I asked him if it was true that he once had, as I was told by a friend, boiling rice gruel spilt over his posterior, and that Sri Bhagavan knew about it only some time after. Bhagavan accepted that the story was true and gave me the details. The incident took place in the ashram kitchen. On the right, there is a photo of Bhagavan sitting on the kitchen veranda in the late 1930s. And this was Bhagavan's explanation. I was straining the kanji, rice water, from a vessel in which rice had been boiled. I was sitting on the floor. The boiling kanji was to be collected in a smaller vessel on the floor. But I was talking to someone, and without my noticing, the kanji fell on the floor, not in the vessel. As the floor sloped towards me, it got under my posterior. I knew about it only afterwards when it got cool. Of course, I got blistered, and zambuk, a pain ointment, was later applied. No doubt there was pain after it was noticed, but who cares? The bliss of self-realization perhaps drowns any other experiences. The photo is of Bhagavan eating in the old dining room. You can tell it's the old dining room and not the new one, because you can see the sloping wooden beams in the ceiling. That last story gives me an excuse to head off on a tangent to give other examples of how Bhagavan seemed to be mostly impervious to pain. The narrator for the next few pages, which all contain stories about Bhagavan's pain threshold, is Rangan, one of his schoolboy friends. Rangan begins with the words on the screen. On one of my visits to Skandashram, I noticed Bhagavan's leg was bleeding. He had just had a bath and he was drying his body with a towel. What is that injury? I asked with great concern. Bhagavan had not noticed it before, so he replied, I don't know. How can it be, Bhagavan, that you're not even aware that your leg is bleeding so much? I was surprised that Bhagavan could be so ignorant of such a major injury. The photo shows Bhagavan sitting on the front parapet wall at Skandashram facing the town. Its story continues. After considering all the possibilities, Bhagavan remarked, "I think a coal from the incense burner must have fallen on my leg and caused a burn." I got some medicine and applied it to his leg with a new understanding of how much distance there is between Bhagavan and his body. On the right, Bhagavan is sitting next to his mother at Skandashram. As someone who regularly walks on Arunachali with bare feet, I have to say that his next story is one that really impresses me, since it deals with thorns in the feet. Rangan continues with his story. This understanding was reinforced by another incident that took place on a day when Bhagavan and I were walking on the forest path around the mountain. At one point, I stepped on a thorn. When Bhagavan saw me lagging behind, he stopped, came back to where I was, and removed the thorn from my foot. A few yards later, it was Bhagavan's turn to step on a big thorn. I ran up to him, lifted his foot, and was astonished to see innumerable thorns sticking out of it. Some were old and some were new. The photo shows Bhagavan on one of his Palakottu walks, accompanied by Guy Haig. This is where the forest path used to start. It should be noted that Bhagavan never ever wore sandals when he walked around the hill. The forest trail he followed would have been littered with small thorny twigs. Rangan continues. I lifted his other foot and found that it had just as many thorns embedded in it. Which thorns will you remove? Asked Bhagavan with a laugh. The old ones or the new ones? Bhagavan then crushed the protruding thorn with the same foot it was embedded in and happily walked away, accompanied by me. What better proof is there that Bhagavan had nothing to do with his body? In retrospect, I think that Bhagavan intentionally let me see him behaving like this in order to make it clear that he had ceased to identify with his body. In the photo on the right, Rangan is the man standing on the right with folded arms. A few words on Bhagavan's pain threshold. In the final months of his life, when the sarcoma was eating away his arm, Bhagavan was asked whether he felt pain. He said he felt it distantly, as if it were a dream pain. Pain was there, he said, but there was no suffering. Suffering is a response to pain, a feeling, I don't want this, I don't like this, I want it to stop. Bhagavan never had this kind of reaction to bodily pains. A few months ago, I read an interesting article about anesthetics. Some people are highly allergic to them, but they can still be operated on in a conscious state if they're given a massive dose of Valium. The Valium somehow stops the brain from having negative thoughts about the pain, and by doing so, it massively reduces the brain's interpretation of pain. In that state, there is no anticipation that pain is going to be bad and that it needs to be avoided. I suspect jnanis are in a slightly similar state. They don't judge pain as being something negative or as something their mental anticipation says is going to be unpleasant, so it registers at a much smaller intensity. Now it's time to go back to Narayana Iyer's account. This is how he continued. Sri Bhagavan did not always show the same external demeanor. Most of the time he was a very pleasing person with a fascinating welcome smile. However, on occasion he could be stern and look forbidding. At such moments people were struck with a forbidding awe. One hot Sunday afternoon, an old devotee placed before Bhagavan some palmyra fruits, nongu. Nongus are watery, lens-shaped, translucent fruits that are found inside the large nuts of palmyra trees. There is a picture of them both inside the nut and outside on the right. Narayana Iyer continues. Bhagavan severely remarked, "Why do you do this daily? You're a sannyasin. You must beg from others to get money to procure these. When you do this, you must say that they are for me. You know that I cannot eat them without others present sharing them, and so you have to get a large quantity. This you do using my name, as though I desire it." It's not easy to find photos of Bhagavan looking stern and angry, but here's one from the new dining hall. Whenever Bhagavan did get angry, it was often because food was not being distributed equally in the dining room. The photographer might have caught Bhagavan in a moment when he spotted some inegalitarian behavior by the ashram's food service. Bhagavan's outburst continued, "Can't you keep quiet and mind your own business? You prostrate before me and think you have won me over. Every prostration is like a blow on my head. All sorts of things are done outside these four walls with impunity, as though these walls hide and protect them. Who likes these prostrations?" Narayana Iyer continued, on he went in a tirade against all and sundry who posed as pious men but were hiding a lot of impurity. It was not just one individual who was being attacked. The atmosphere in the hall was tense, and one by one the devotees sneaked out. But such moods were only momentary, and he could switch on to his more usual geniality the next instant. Since this is a story about Bhagavan being in the hall, here is a photo of him on his sofa with Narayana Iyer peeping out behind him in the background. Bhagavan's ability to switch almost instantly from apparent anger to his more usual geniality is illustrated in the next story. Narayana Iyer continues, "Once, for example, Sri TPR and I decided to ask Bhagavan for an explanation of the 6th stanza of Arunachala Ashtakam. We went to the hall to ask our question after Sri Bhagavan had returned from his usual walk on the hill. In the hall, Sri Muruganar had just prostrated before Sri Bhagavan and then gone out on his usual begging round to obtain food for his lunch." That's T.P. Ramachandra Iyer sitting next to Bhagavan in a photo that was taken around 1930. TPR was one of the ashram's lawyers, and he also served as Bhagavan's attendant from time to time. Narayana Iyer continues, "Earlier that day we had ground up some jackfruit for a sweet dish that would be served at the midday meal. It was going to be a special meal because Muruganar had given a donation for a bhiksha to commemorate the death of his mother. In this context, a bhiksha denotes a meal in the dining room that has been paid for by a particular devotee, usually to commemorate some family event. Non-residents of the ashram, such as Muruganar, who offered bhiksha in this way, would normally be invited to join all the other devotees and visitors to share the meal in the dining room. When special meals were offered, they would often include extra items that were not normally on the menu. In this case, the extra item was a jackfruit dessert. Muruganar had a particular fondness for his mother, so it is not surprising that he chose to remember her in this way. Several of Muruganar's books have verses praising his mother or dedications to her. The photo shows Muruganar sitting in front of Bhagavan in the late 1940s. Time for another digression. Muruganar loved living as a sadhu, and he particularly liked going out to beg for his food. Here are 4 of his verses spread over 2 slides that celebrate the practice. "The ultimate tapas is living on begged food and doing it without the false pride, I am doing this. Those who have accomplished this should not be disregarded as degraded and undignified people. Their majesty, thriving through a dispassion that is rooted in jnana, is unattainable even for Indra, the chief of the devas. Through jnana, the authentic grace that terminates ignorance, I have been blessed with the great fortune of eating food obtained by begging in a way that elevates rather than demeans. And through the infinite Shivam nature that surges as inexhaustible wealth, both likes and dislikes became false." Photo shows Muruganar sitting next to Bhagavan in 1923. And here are the final 2 verses. "My Lord, who possesses the power of bestowing jnana, which shines abundantly in him, desired true knowledge to arise for me. As a result, what I attained inside was becoming the supreme ruler of the empire of the self. The great life I attained outside was living on begged food. For a sadhu, the great life of accepting and eating food as alms is the fearless and majestic life of grace. It is a life free of reproach, in which he exists as supreme bliss in the transcendental expanse, the state of peace devoid of the leaping of the insignificant mind." And that is, of course, Muruganar at the bottom of the slide. Bhagavan felt the same sense of exhilaration when he went out to beg for his own food in the 1890s. This is what he had to say about it in Day by Day with Bhagavan. He, Bhagavan, said, "You cannot conceive of the majesty and dignity I felt while so begging. The first day when I begged from Guru Kaur's wife, I felt bashful about it as a result of habits of upbringing, but after that there was absolutely no feeling of abasement. I felt like a king and more than a king. I have sometimes received stale gruel at some house and taken it without salt or any other flavouring in the open street before great pandits and other important men who used to come and prostrate themselves before me." This, as I'm sure everybody knows, is the oldest photo of Bhagavan we have. It was taken outside Mango Tree Cave about 5 years after the events he's describing here. Bhagavan concluded his story by saying, "I then wiped my hands on my head and passed on supremely happy and in a state of mind in which even emperors were mere straw in my sight. You can't imagine it. It is because there is such a path that we find tales in history of kings giving up their thrones and taking to this path." Now back to Narayana Iyer's account, where he describes Bhagavan's reaction to the news that Chinnaswami had not invited Muruganar to attend the ashram lunch that he had paid for in memory of his mother. Muruganar went out to beg for his lunch because he had not been invited to the meal that he himself had paid for. We felt sorry that he was not going to be there to taste the special dish we had helped to make. The fact that he was going out after giving something for a bhiksha in honor of his mother was brought to the attention of Sri Bhagavan. Instantly there was a change in Bhagavan's facial expression. He knew that Sri Muruganar was not a favourite with the ashram management. Muruganar is standing behind Paramaswami, the man holding the sandals. I don't know the exact history or cause of the animosity that Chinnaswami felt towards Muruganar. I think it may have had something to do with the fact that Muruganar published his books on Bhagavan through an outside publisher, Ramana Padananda. Other devotees, such as Lakshman Sharma, had similar problems with Chinnaswami, and for the same reason. Bhagavan remarked, "Who has to invite him to stay for meals? Chinnaswami does not like him. He is the master here." Chinnaswami is sitting on the front row on the right side of the photo. T.P. Ramachandra Iyer, who had come to the hall with Narayana Iyer to get an explanation of the Arunachala Ashtakam verse, is sitting in the front on the left. Bhagavan rarely intervened in the day-to-day running of the ashram, such as decisions about who was or was not allowed to eat in the dining room. He left all those matters to his brother. Narayana Iyer continues with the story. "There was tension in the atmosphere. TPR and I whispered to each other that we would choose some other time for our question. We closed the books we had brought with us. Sri Bhagavan saw us doing this and asked us what the matter was. We told him what we had originally planned to ask." That's TPR standing with Bhagavan on the hill in what looks to me to be the early 1940s. Bhagavan decided to take up the matter immediately. Instantly, Sri Bhagavan replied, "Why not now?" and started explaining the verse. It was wonderful. Every sentence started a mighty current. It didn't stop there. Wave after wave of the same exposition came to us for a day or two more whenever we sat before him. The scan of the Tamil manuscript I featured on the right needs a little explanation. The Tamil handwriting is what Munagala Venkatramaya, the compiler of Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, wrote down in talk number 323, which was recorded in January 1937. It's a very long and detailed explanation of the Arunachala Ashtakam verse that Narayana Iyer and TPR had been hoping that Bhagavan would explain to them. There is no indication in the book of what prompted this long commentary or who asked for it, but given its unusual length, it may be the explanation given to Narayana Iyer and T.P. Ramachandra Iyer. Narayana Iyer noted in his account that Bhagavan spoke for an unusually long time when he gave his exposition. The talk's commentary is the longest one recorded on a single Bhagavan verse in the whole of the book. I take this to be another piece of circumstantial evidence that it was given to Narayana Iyer and TPR in the aftermath of the episode in which Bhagavan expressed his annoyance that Murugan had not been invited to lunch. Bhagavan's detailed explanation was written down in Tamil rather than English by Managala Venkatramaya, indicating that it was delivered to Tamil-speaking devotees who didn't need an interpreter. This may also be a further piece of evidence that the talk was given to Narayana Iyer and TPR, both of whom were native Tamilians who wouldn't have needed a translation. Less than 10% of the talk's material that has survived was recorded in the original Tamil. Here is the next portion of what Munagala wrote. At the top are the three possible protagonists in this drama: Munagala on the left, TPR in the middle, and Narayana Iyer on the right. I'm going to be posting the whole of the Tamil explanation, since there may be Tamil-knowing devotees who want to go through it to see what was written in the talk's manuscript on the day that Bhagavan gave his discourse. The version on the screen has never been published before, so far as I know. Those who want to go through it can read it off the screen in the YouTube versions that will appear on the Foundation's channel and later on my own. The Tamil edition of talks was translated from the English edition. This means that the sections which were originally recorded in Tamil by Munagala were later translated into English prior to publication in the first 1950s edition, and then many years later the English was retranslated back into Tamil. The Tamil edition was prepared by Viswanatham Swami in the 1970s. He didn't use this manuscript since he was not aware of its existence when he did the work. The large ledger containing these recordings was one of the many treasures I uncovered in the ashram archives long after Viswanatha Swami had done his translation work and actually passed away. And here is the next section of the original Tamil recorded by Munagala. Munagala is on the right, and Viswanatha Swami, the translator of the Tamil edition of talks, is on the top left. As you could imagine, I was quite excited to discover that some of Bhagavan's expositions still existed in their original Tamil wording. I made a copy of all the material that had been recorded in Tamil in the talk's manuscript, about 20 pages if I remember correctly, took it to Ganeshan, who was then running the ashram, and suggested he publish these fragments in a Tamil booklet so that Tamil-knowing devotees could read something that was a lot closer to what Bhagavan actually said. Much to my surprise, Ganeshan declined, saying that the language of the text was in vernacular conversational Tamil, not the formal literary Tamil that was usually used to present Bhagavan's words. Here is the final portion of Bhagavan's explanation of the Ashtakam verse, with a 1940s photo of Ganeshan and Bhagavan next to it. Ganeshan seemed to think that it was somehow disrespectful to print Bhagavan's teachings in their unprocessed colloquial form. I was of the opinion that there were many devotees who would prefer to see the original words rather than an edited and polished version of them, but since Ganeshan headed the publication department of the ashram, his view prevailed, and the material I offered him was never published. Before I continue with Narayana Iyer's account, I want to make a few extra observations about the recordings of Bhagavan's spoken teachings in Tamil. Even though it was Bhagavan's native language, and even though the majority of dialogues with Bhagavan were in Tamil, there are surprisingly few records of Bhagavan's verbal teachings in that language in their exact and original form. This lack was exacerbated by Bhagavan's refusal ever to have his spoken teachings electronically recorded. The Tamil translators in the hall, such as Devaraja Mudalia, seen here at the top, mostly recorded the exchanges and teachings in English. Munagala did record some of the conversations in their original Tamil if no translations were required, but as I said earlier, these were never published. That's Munagala on the right, standing outside his hut in Palakottu in the 1930s. Devotees who did record and publish Bhagavan's Tamil words tended to present and publish them in a stylized literary form. Sadhu Natananda in Upadesha Manjari, Spiritual Instruction, and Muruganar in Guru Vajka Kovai are good examples of this. Sadhu Natananda liked long, occasionally prolix sentences that were carefully constructed in literary Tamil. Some of his sentences in his Tamil book Sri Ramana Darshanam go on for 3 pages. Muruganar recorded Bhagavan statements in 4-line Tamil verses. Both books, I should stress, are accurate records of Bhagavan's teachings, since we know that Bhagavan read and checked them both. Spiritual Instruction has appeared in virtually every edition of the collected work since it came out. And in the case of Guru Vajka Kovai, Bhagavan went through the final text before it was published and added many edits and corrections of his own. On the right, you can see some of the changes that Bhagavan made to Guru Vajka Kovai. In the right-hand photo, he is adding a verse of his own to the text and indicating where in the sequence it should go. The new verse says, simply to inquire who is it that experiences this karma activity, this alienation, vivakti, this separation, viyoga, and this ignorance, constitutes in itself the paths of karma, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. For when upon inquiry the I ceases to be, these, karma and so on, are known to be eternally without existence. Only abiding as the self is the state of reality. My favorite editing interpolation by Bhagavan in Guru Vajka Kovai is the one that appears at the top left of the slide. Sadhu Natananda, the editor of the work, had written an introduction that contained the Tamil sentence inside the box. What it says in English is, in summary, it can be said that this is a work that it has come into existence to explain in great detail and in a pristine form Sri Ramana's philosophy and its essential nature, Swarupa. After Bhagavan had completed his editing and corrections, he went through the introduction and made one insertion. You can see it if you look carefully on the bottom line of the Tamil sentence. This inserted syllable, vai, results in 2 possible new meanings. The first is, out of all the available books on Sri Ramana's teachings, this work alone has come into existence to explain in great detail and in a pristine form Sri Ramana's philosophy and its essential nature. A second, less extreme translation would mean, this book has most definitely come into existence to explain in great detail and in a pristine form Sri Ramana's philosophy and its essential nature. Whichever reading one takes, it is a ringing endorsement by Bhagavan of this particular collection of his teachings. But, as I said before, these are not the words that actually came out of Bhagavan's mouth in Tamil. For some of those, we have to look elsewhere. On the screen, there is an excerpt from Annamalai Swami's diary, which he recorded in Tamil in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Annamalai Swami was not an educated man, so he couldn't reformulate what he heard Bhagavan say in a more literary way. He just wrote down what Bhagavan said. On the screen are 2 pages from his diary dated 1938, along with a picture of the cover of the English translation of the diary. Both the original Tamil of the diary and a translation of them have been published by Annamalai Swami's Trust. I will put a link to them in my YouTube write-up. Annamalai Swami was the son of a farmer. When he was 5 years old, his father sent him to school with the following instructions. Go to school and learn how to sign your name. We are farmers. We don't need anything more than that from school. Annamalai Swami told me that it took him 2 weeks at school to accomplish this, after which, as his father had ordered, he came home to help in the fields. When he arrived at Ramanashramam in early 1929, he was more or less illiterate. He learned the basics of reading and writing at Ramanashramam, but always struggled with the more complex forms of Tamil. Because of this educational deficiency, he didn't have the skills to modify or make more stylish the words that came out of Bhagavan's mouth. I think that was a great blessing for those of us who want to know the kind of Tamil that Bhagavan actually spoke. Venkata Subramaniam, the Tamil Pandit I worked with for more than 15 years, told me that there was something pure, original, and authoritative in these unedited writings. He said that reading these lines from a barely educated construction worker gave one a real sense of how Bhagavan actually spoke. On the right, you can see Annamalai Swami standing behind Bhagavan with his arms folded. This photo was taken in 1938, around the time he was making the diary entry that appeared on an earlier slide. And at the top, there is a photo of him taking cow Lakshmi for a grazing walk. He told me that when fodder supplies were low, devotees used to take it in turns to take Lakshmi out to forage in the neighborhood of the ashram. After that lengthy digression into the different ways that Bhagavan's spoken Tamil teachings were written down and processed, it's time to go back to Narayana Iyer's account. This is what he wrote next. Sri Bhagavan had his head shaved once a month on the full moon day. Natesan was the barber who used to do this service. Bhagavan sat on a stool, and Natesan would stand and shave him. Once Sri Bhagavan suggested to Natesan in all seriousness that it would be more comfortable for the barber to sit on the stool while he himself would sit on the floor. That's Natesan on the right. In his later years he had eye problems, which is why he's wearing the dark glasses in this photo. When I arrived at Ramanaswaram in 1976, Natesan was still there. He ran a barber shop about 300 meters from the ashram entrance. Every day he would walk from there to Ramanaswaram to pay his respects to Bhagavan. I would often pass him on the road. He was very old at this point, and his hands were trembling a bit, but all the visiting male devotees I knew would, at some point, go along to his shop to get a haircut or a shave from the man who had personally shaved Bhagavan for many years. A year or so, someone sent me this lovely photo of the Ramanaswaram entrance that dates from the mid-70s. This is more or less how it looked when I arrived. The old man walking towards the ashram gates with a stick in his hand looks to me a bit like Natesan the barber. It may not be him, but the similarity gives me the opportunity to post this photo, which shows just how quiet and empty the area in front of Ramanaswaram was in those days. No traffic apart from the occasional bicycle. Back to Natesan and his story. When I put together this chapter on Narayana Iyer for the new edition of The Power of the Presence, I realized that although I had assembled more than 1,000 pages of stories about Bhagavan from a wide variety of sources and devotees, I hadn't mentioned Natesan the barber in any of them. So for the sake of completion, I decided to interpolate an account I found in the mountain path that gave details of his life and his association with Bhagavan. On the right side photo, Natesan is standing behind Bhagavan in the cowshed between the two horns of a cow. I was shown this photo only a few days ago when I attended a school fair about a kilometre from where I live in Annamalai. Kumar, the great-grandson of Natesan the barber, had a display of his Arunachala artwork, and at the front of his stall there was this photo of Natesan with Bhagavan. I had seen the group photo before, but I hadn't realized that Natesan the barber was in it. The original group photo from which it is taken is at the top on the left. Natesan used to shave Bhagavan in the ashram cowshed, which probably explains his presence here sitting among the cowshed workers with a group of cows. This is what the account said. It was published in the Mountain Path, as I said, in July 81, around the time I stopped editing the journal. I have a vague memory of editing it, but I can't remember who might have actually written it. It begins, our Natesan had the unique privilege of shaving Bhagavan for an uninterrupted period of 25 years. He is a native of Polur, a town 33 kilometers north of Tiruvannamalai. His father, a devotee of Lord Arunachaleswara, the deity in the Tiruvannamalai temple, used to visit Tiruvannamalai on the first day of each Tamil month in order to do a production of Arunachala. After reaching a ripe old age, his father eventually died during one of his walks around the mountain. Sri Natesan considers that it was the merit earned by his father which eventually earned him the privilege of serving Bhagavan. After his father's death, Natesan was adopted by his uncle Subbarayan. The story continues. His uncle first saw Bhagavan at Gurumurtam, a period, the late 1890s, when Bhagavan had long matted hair. On seeing Sri Bhagavan, Subbarayan asked for permission to give him a shave. Bhagavan remained silent, and Subbarayan took this to be a negative answer. Later, when some of the devotees wanted to give Bhagavan a shave, Subbarayan was approached by them, and he happily accepted their invitation. From that time on, he shaved Bhagavan regularly. When he became too old to continue the work around 1925, he advised his nephew Natesan to continue the service. Natesan gladly accepted the honor, and he shaved Sri Bhagavan on the morning of each full moon day. At the bottom there is a lovely old photo of Gurumurtam where Bhagavan stayed for about 18 months in the 1890s. It only came to light a few years ago when it was discovered in a tin box of old photos that the ashram archives had acquired. Chadwick is sitting on the steps, which means it must have been taken after 1935, the year he arrived at Ramenasaram. The account continues. On the mornings when he was due to shave Bhagavan, Natesan would first have a bath, smear vibhuti on himself, and then respectfully approach Bhagavan at exactly 9 a.m. At this time of day, Bhagavan would normally have just returned from his morning walk. On seeing Natesan, Bhagavan would apply oil to the rheumatic swelling in his joints, and then slowly walk to the cowshed. A special place was set aside in the cowshed for shaving. On the days when Bhagavan had his shave, it would be specially cleaned and then decorated with rangoli, floor patterns. The photo shows Bhagavan standing in front of the cowshed. The building looks quite new in this picture, which means it was taken in the early 1930s. The story continues. Natesan would prostrate before starting the shave and then complete the shave in silence. Only when it was completed would he say a few words to Bhagavan. On one occasion, Sri Narayana Swami, Chinnaswami, called Natesan and asked him to start the work an hour earlier. Narayana Swami thought that in the heat of the summer this would be more convenient for Bhagavan. Natesan turned up at the newly appointed hour. In response to Bhagavan's questioning gaze, he narrated Narayana Swami's new plan. At the bottom you can see Chinnaswami, Narayana Swami and Bhagavan inspecting the building work that was being done on the ashram dining room in the late 1930s. Bhagavan was not in favor of the new arrangement. The story continues. Bhagavan said that the heat was of no importance and the former timetable was restored. Natesan also used to play Nadaswaran music for weddings and other festivities. Once when he was shaving Bhagavan, his uncle Subbarayan came to see him and told him that he was required to play some music in town as soon as he had finished shaving Bhagavan. Hearing this remark, Bhagavan remarked, "It seems that Natesan has to go to town by 12 noon. He has not taken any food since this morning." His attendants, who were standing nearby, took the hint and brought him some lunch from the kitchen. Barbers are normally treated as outcasts, and caste Hindus would normally only offer them food after they themselves had finished eating. Natesan was overwhelmed by this show of compassion by Bhagavan and felt that only Bhagavan could love like this. Recalling this incident in later years, Natesan was moved to tears and pointed out that Bhagavan always treated devotees equally and was particular that no one went without food. This photo shows Bhagavan walking away from the cowshed, followed by one of his attendants. The building on the right is the Ramanasaram Patisala. The story continues. Natesan considered his service to Bhagavan to be his highest priority and never failed to appear for the monthly shave. On one occasion, on the day before a full moon, Natesan's brother, who was living in a village nearby, fell sick, and his life appeared to be in danger. Natesan explained his position to his relatives, and they wisely advised him to go at once to Tiruvannamalai and do his sacred duty. Soon after concluding the shave the following day, one of his relatives appeared to inform him that his brother had died and that he was required immediately for the last rites. Bhagavan heard this information being passed on and remarked, "It seems that Natesan's brother has passed away and he has to go at once to Polor. He could not have taken his food yet, and it is not known whether he has money to travel." Hearing this, one of Bhagavan's attendants, Ramakrishna Swami, went to the kitchen and brought some food. Natesan had little appetite for food, but he took 3 cups of coffee and was given 5 rupees for his journey. That's Ramakrishna Swami sitting on the left of the photo. Murugana is the devotee sitting between him and Bhagavan. The story continues. Once Natesan prostrated to Bhagavan when he met him walking on the hill. "Why here?" questioned Bhagavan. Natesan took this to mean that his prostration in the cowshed was a sufficient expression of devotion and that he need not do it elsewhere. Natesan always used to spend a few minutes with Bhagavan after his monthly work had been completed. In those few minutes, he would have Bhagavan's uninterrupted and undivided attention. The photo shows Bhagavan walking on the lower slopes of the hill with Yogi Ramaya, who appeared to be on duty as attendant that day. And here is the final paragraph of the account. Natesan now considers these short sessions listening to the compassionate words of Bhagavan to be the happiest moments of his life. Although he is now 76, he still continues to serve devotees in the ashram, and many of them consider it a privilege to be shaved by the same hands that shaved Bhagavan. Natesan still comes to the ashram every day to pay his respects to Sri Bhagavan, and he is passing a quiet and contented old age in the proximity and the presence of the Master, whom he served and worshipped for a quarter of a century. Back now to Narayana Iyer's account of his time with Bhagavan. It was past 8:30 one night on one of my visits. Everyone had retired to rest after the night meal. I went to the office. Chinnaswami was sitting in his place talking to some ashramites. When he saw me enter, he said, "Narayana Iyer, don't go near Sri Bhagavan's couch. He is resting on the veranda near the wall. He has fractured his collarbone and a plaster has been put on it. He should not be disturbed. Prostrate at a distance and come away noiselessly." When Narayana Iyer said that Chinnaswami was sitting in his place, he meant his seat in the ashram office. Here he is behind his desk in a photo that was taken in 1949 for an American magazine. Narayana Iyer continues, "I was shocked to hear the news. If any other reason had been given, it might have restrained me, but the mention of a fracture made me anxious to see Sri Bhagavan. I went on tiptoe and prostrated quietly. He evidently saw me because he said, 'Narayana Iyer, come and sit by my side on the couch. Only then can I see you and talk. Otherwise the bandage they have put might be disturbed and there might be pain.'" Bhagavan asking Narayana Iyer to come and sit by his side in the hall gives me another welcome opportunity to show this lovely photo of the two of them sitting side by side in the old hall. Narayana Iyer continues, "Implicitly I obeyed when he said this, notwithstanding my fear of Chinnaswami's reaction if he should happen to see me there. He said I was going up the steps. A dog was chasing a squirrel. I barred its way by putting my walking stick in front of it. The stick slipped and I fell down and got hurt on the collarbone. They say it is a fracture, and the native bone setter of the village, an old devotee, was sent for. He has put this bandage with some green leaves and black gram paste, and I'm enjoined not to move, lest it be disturbed." The photo here shows Bhagavan sitting on his sofa in the old hall, playing with a squirrel. Squirrels felt no fear of Bhagavan and could often be found running around on his body. Bhagavan usually had a tin nearby which contained nuts that he periodically gave out to the squirrels, so it is not surprising that they congregated around him, nor is it surprising that he made an unsuccessful attempt to protect one of his pets when he was out walking. The story continues. He narrated the incident as though it was someone else's body that was injured and was suffering. "One day in the last weeks of Sri Bhagavan's illness, a devout lady prostrated herself before him with her 2 children and entreated, "Bhagavan, you must not leave the body. You must continue to give us darshan." Bhagavan smiled and said, "Yes, see there." He pointed to the sculptor at work on a granite statue of the Maharshi. "They are chiseling a Bhagavan who will give you darshan always." The 2 photos on the bottom right show the statue Bhagavan was referring to when it was still at the stage of being a clay model. The finished statue, made of polished granite, now sits on a stone sofa in the new hall. Then he turned to the other people present and said, "Now these people have become my gurus. I have been saying, give up your dehatma buddhi, identification with the body. They now want me to cling to the body." After a pause, he continued, "You see what it means. I must not leave this body so that I can give her darshan always. To have darshan, she too must not die. And what about her children? They too must always have darshan, so nobody should die." The truth was grimly portentous and told in his own unique way. On the right, you can see Bhagavan with his cancer-ridden arm sitting on his sofa in the new hall. There is a cloth covering the bandaged arm. TPR, who has been mentioned a few times in this talk, is the attendant facing the camera. Viswanatham recorded an incident in which Bhagavan and Narayana Iyer discussed giving up the I am the body idea. This is what he wrote. Sri R. Narayana Iyer, retired sub-registrar, once told me that he asked Bhagavan about too much emphasis being given by Ramana devotees to the discarding of the I am the body idea, and said that this was impossible for him since he was always aware of this body and its creature comforts. Sri Bhagavan graciously remarked, yes, you cannot give up the I am the body consciousness without first being aware of it. There is nothing wrong with that. The giving up of the idea should take place by the grace of God, for by our own effort it will be very difficult. In this photo, Narayana Iyer is standing on the back row with his arms folded. The boy at the front is Sundaram, Ganesh's elder brother. And now it's time for the final account, written just after Bhagavan passed away. Narayana Iyer was in a state of deep shock and mourning, and it shows in his language and comments. He begins, "Before some stars appear, light appears. But after they vanish from vision, light alone remains. That is the state of a jnani, his birth and death." These were the words of Sri Bhagavan in a talk about jnanis. The exact import of the words is as puzzling as the strange phenomena that occurred on the 14th April 1950 and passed vividly before our eyes. It was about 9:15 at night. I was sitting in the open space in front of my house facing east. The sky was clear, the air still. A grave and subdued solemnity pervaded the atmosphere, as though reflecting the anxiety of so many sincere devotees of the Maharshi who had come to Annamalai on account of his illness. The scene at the bottom shows the long line of devotees who in April 1950 were waiting to have their final darshan of Bhagavan. He carried on seeing people until the final afternoon of his life. He was in bed in what is now called the Nirvana room. Devotees would look in, pranam, and then move on. No one got more than a few seconds because there were so many people in the line. Narayana Iyer now writes about the meteor that was seen by thousands of people all over India at the moment that Bhagavan passed away. Narayana Iyer saw it in his house and knew exactly what it portended. Suddenly a bright and luminous body arose from the southern horizon, slowly went up and descended in the north somewhere on Arunachala hill. It was not a meteor, as it was bigger than how Venus looks to our vision, and its movement was slow. It was so lustrous that, as it was at its zenith, the light shed by its trail stretched as far as the horizon like an arc. The sight dazzled me. Instinctively, as it were, I jumped to my feet and ran as fast as I could to the ashram 100 yards off. The photo here shows Bhagavan with his doctor outside the Nirvana room in the final days of his life. The light appeared to different people in different ways. Most people saw a large star-like object moving slowly across the sky before disappearing behind the mountain. Annamalai Swami saw it as a slow-moving column of light. Distance was no impediment to its visibility. Papaji told me that he saw it in Lucknow, North India. Narayana Iyer continues. There was a crowd of people moving about and quite a hustle and bustle. It didn't strike me to inquire of anyone what it was about. Access to the Maharshi was naturally then select and restricted to a few. I cared not for the ashram rules and regulations, but like a tethered calf let loose and running to its mother, I took a short cut, jumped into the garden, scaled the parapet, and rushed into the room where the Maharshi, Bhagavan, my Ramana, Guru, Father, God in flesh and blood, was lying. This was the last photo that was taken of Bhagavan while he was alive. It was done by Cartier-Bresson, the famous French photographer. So his Leela was really over on that momentous 14th day of April 1950. No one was kept in doubt or suspense or taken by surprise. It was a prolonged ailment, and abundant opportunity was afforded to one and all from far and near to come and see him. It was one of the worst maladies that could afflict the human frame, and the way he bore it was an object lesson to all. Not once did his face reveal agony or suffering, but he carried on the normal routine with his majestic smile of supreme bliss on his face and the mirthful repartees and sallies of wit. This photo shows Bhagavan lying on his bed outside the Nirvana room sometime in his final days. It was also plain that he used no mysterious yogic or superhuman powers to alleviate or conquer pain, as the following remark he made about the disease would show. Apa, an explanation of surprise. Who could conceive that such a disease as this could be in the world? When a hiccup comes, the whole body splits like the flashes of lightning in a cloud. This remark was made by him in such a cool and composed way, as though it was not his body that was suffering. This is another photo of Bhagavan and his doctor in his final days. I made some comments earlier in the presentation about how Bhagavan experienced pain. He could be unaware of his body after a severe burn and indifferent to multiple thorns sticking into the soles of his feet as he was walking around Arunachala. The pain in his final days must have been far worse for him to make comments such as these. However, as Narayana Iyer notes in his comments, the I am the body feeling was not there to take ownership of the pain or to react to it with aversion. He continues, when I first saw the dead body, my heart thumped, my breath choked. He was no longer in the flesh and blood. He had just breathed his last. As the star descended on the hill, he had left the body. It was held up in Padmasana position by the attendants. I touched the body. There was no warmth. I clasped it in a frenzied grip. The hand, the mere touch of which used to give the thrill of eternity. Coldness of death agitated my nerves. All was over like a dream. Sobs, hymns, and chanting filled the air. My head reeled with dizzy thoughts. This is Bhagavan's body in front of the mother's temple shortly after he passed away. Narayana Iyer continues, we will no longer see our dear Bhagavan in that beautiful form of molten gold in which he charmed and enchanted us for decades. We will no longer see those compassionate eyes that gleamed like twin stars and peered into our innermost depths, dispelling the shadows that blurred our vision and understanding. No more that kind and godly look of grace that gave solace to our wearied souls and inspired our depressed hearts in speechless silence with unbounded peace. Or that bewitching and enchanting radiant smile which fascinated us and drew us to him and took us to heights of bliss, far, far above this world. No more could we hear that sweet and ringing voice, the talks of sparkling wit and humor, or those words of profound wisdom from the depths of deep realization which intellect could not fathom. Tears gushed forth from my eyes as from a fountain. Roll, roll, you beads of love, from the fountain of love to the ocean of love. And he concludes his account with the following lines. It is not fruit and flowers nor sweets and savory dishes that can be offered at your feet anymore. The only oblation that would reach you are tears of love from that perennial spring that is the core of our being, of which you are the source in your disembodied fullness. The divine Leela is over. This ends Narayana Iyer's own contribution to the presentation, but I have an interesting postscript to add, one that was not in my original talk, my original live talk. When I gave a previous installment of this series to the Ramana Maharshi Foundation UK, there was a Q&A at the end, at which I was asked if I knew what had happened to Narayana Iyer's family. I mentioned that Narayana Iyer moved to Chennai and passed away there in 1970, and added that I didn't have much information on the rest of his family. One of Narayana Iyer's grandsons saw the video and provided me with the following updates and extra information. This is Narayan Kapali, the grandson I mentioned, standing under the Ilapai tree near the entrance to Ramanashram. It was taken, he said, on one of his recent visits. That tree has been there since Bhagavan moved to the current site of Ramanashram in 1922. This is what Narayan Kapali told me. Dear Mr. Godman, I came upon your series on Narayana Iyer and thought of sending this message of thanks to you for making this series. I am a grandson of Narayana Iyer. It was nice to see a lot of our family pictures in your series. I interacted with you very briefly several years or so ago, when you wrote in your blog about Narayana Iyer. My brother may actually have met you at an airport and briefly chatted with you. It was interesting that in your interactive presentation, someone asked a question about our generation that followed Narayana Iyer. The generation diaspora of Narayana Iyer is now all over the world, with our lives and career taking us to different places, but our spiritual heart is still at Tiruvannamalai, at the ashram, at the feet of Bhagavan, and at that house. Oh, that house. I did a disservice to the family by saying in my answer in that Q&A that the generations that came after Narayana Iyer were not as committed to Bhagavan as Narayana Iyer himself. I came to that conclusion because none of the family members seemed to use the house after Narayana Iyer departed for Madras. The grandson put me right on this point. He wrote, far from losing interest, though not living there, many of us visit Tiruvannamalai often. We live, breathe, and think of Bhagavan, Tiruvannamalai every day. We could never lose interest in such a thrilling association that our grandfather, my elder aunt and uncle, who have passed away now, had with Bhagavan. In fact, I was there just a couple of months ago, visited the Arunachala temple, and did the Girivalam, the sacred trek around the hill, visited Ramanashram, the bookstore, and even had a short meeting with the president. I have visited Tiruvannamalai often, and during each of my visits, I go down to the house, the well, the round hut that was. And then Narayan Kapali commented on one of the photos I posted in an earlier talk. The wedding couple that you had in that presentation were my parents. I have lived in that house during the few days of vacation in the 1960s that I used to visit with my mother and brothers. It is vivid in my memory to this day. The place was just like the 1970s photo of the ashram you had in your presentation, with the path to the house rocky and unpaved. This is probably the photo he's referring to of the path from Narayana Iyer's house to Ramanashram. I think it was taken well before the 1970s. Life on that road was quite primitive in the 40s and 50s. One lady who looked after Muruganal wrote that many devotees didn't have their own water supply. These were the days before municipal water pipes reached the area. Ramanashram provided a tap near its front gate so that devotees who lived locally could fill up their buckets there. Dorab Framji, who lived opposite Narayana Iyer, said his house was lit by kerosene lamps well into the 1950s. And my favourite story, Lucia Osborne told me that their home was the first in the area to get an electric ceiling fan, something that was so new and unheard of, her servants had never seen one before or even heard of them. She told me that they kept going up to the roof to see if someone up there was peddling a machine to make the fan blades go round. The grandson continues, yes, yet I love to go to the ashram even when I was as young at that time. Bhagavan's presence and our grandfather's time with him is so much a part of us that we never tire of hearing about it. Any time the subject of Bhagavan comes up in our families, It immediately causes a mesmerizing effect on us. The room gets lively, with everyone narrating, recalling our times there, and we delve into our respective experiences, this incident and that. Our grandfather was well versed in English and thankfully wrote quite a bit about his time with Bhagavan. But you are right that though his life and experiences were covered in multiple articles, some by him and some by others close to him, in bits and pieces in the mountain path, there was not a consolidated version. A book has recently been published by Sri Ramana a year or so ago. You may have seen it, titled To See God is to Become God, Experiences of Sub-Registrar Narayana Iyer with Sri Bhagavan, a compilation. We are also trying to compile another version of this. And that is, of course, Narayana Iyer standing on the right of the photo with his arms folded. As for the house, our grandfather had to move to Madras when his health was deteriorating. To this day, we feel giving up that house was unfortunate, but compelled by circumstances. Ever since then, getting back the house just seems to be a stretch away. Regardless, we cherish our grandfather's close association with Bhagavan. We cherish our personal association with Annamalai, Ramana and the house in Ramana Nagar. I liked your series and look forward to more of these. Thank you. I asked Narayan Kapali if he had a photo of himself with Narayana Iyer. He said that unfortunately he didn't, but he did identify his mother in this group photo I posted in one of my earlier presentations. She is the young girl sitting on the right of the front row. He added that she would often sing the Saranagati song in front of Sri Bhagavan. And that concludes my 4-part presentation of Narayana Iyer and his association with Bhagavan. I hope you all enjoyed it. Before I end, though, I want to say a few words about something I didn't include in this month's presentation. In my closing remarks of the previous installment, I mentioned that I planned in today's final talk to include the story of an extraordinary North Indian woman, Surendra Kaur, as an example of how it is not necessary to leave one's job and family in order to attain liberation. Unfortunately, I underestimated how long it would take to complete my final talk on Narayana Iyer. As usual, I got sidetracked on major detours and used up all my time on completing this series. That's a photo of Surendra Kaur on the right. I have recorded the talk about her separately, and I uploaded it to my YouTube channel a few weeks ago. So once again, thank you for joining me and for staying till the end of this rather long talk. I hope you all appreciate it. Thank you.